Assange deal? Free Ross. Deep dirt on Dagestan. Boeing PsyOp revealed, and more. The Monica Perez Show starts now. Big news today. Julian Assange, I saw a video of him walking onto a plane. Looks like Julian Assange is free. And I don't know if you know, but I have never really bought into the whole Julian Assange thing. I completely and utterly believe that Ross Ulbricht was framed, railroaded, is in jail for something he didn't do, that what he's even accused of doing, I'm not even sure would be a crime if you really dug into it. And he is the one who should be freed. Assange, I have a lot of questions about as far as his story and the legitimacy. But today's news is that he was, I guess he was released from prison in England. He was there for like years awaiting extradition to the US, and they wouldn't extradite him under the Espionage Act. I think there were numerous charges that were leveled against him. Most recently, though, he recently got out of this British prison. He was in Bangkok and is en route now to the island of Saipan, where he will be, I guess, sentenced. What is the story? He's going to be sentenced in U.S. District Court in Saipan at 9 a.m. a local time on Wednesday. And there was all this back and forth because his only condition was that he never has to step foot in the United States again. So they had to like do some screwy things with the plea bargain. And I think technically he is considered to be like it has to be a misdemeanor in order for him to be able to plea remotely. I don't know if that's going to bubble up to the surface, but anyway, he is expected to accept a charge under the U.S. Espionage Act, where he will probably end up being considered to have served his time already because he was in jail for a long time. But this has been going on for a while. He was originally charged with rape, or maybe even just statutory rape in Sweden. I don't know, in Sweden. And then he had asylum in the Ecuador embassy in London. And then the US charged him after Sweden dropped the charges. Ecuador kicked him out. Then he was in a British jail. That's what they tell me. But I never believe these stories about jail, about people being in jail, which, by the way, speaking of which, I have been on and off in Facebook jail for the longest time now. So I am not streaming to Facebook anymore. And if you can look at the banner there on the screen, what I'm going to do is I'm live streaming to rockfin.com/Monica Perez. I'm live streaming to Rumble, but I always live stream to YouTube so that we can chit chat. That's an easiest place for me to get comments. But I'm going to probably start taking the shows down around 5 minutes in, not when it's live, but afterwards. So if you're trying to watch this when it's not live, you might have to go finish it somewhere else. But Rumble is free, rumble.com/user/Monica Perez Show. I sometimes wonder if they suppress the search on that as well. Anyway, and of course, you can always hear this show on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you don't like the commercials, go to iTunes and become a premium subscriber for not even $5 a month. So, but what he did, so when I hear these people are in jail, I don't really believe it, or I figure it's some kind of Epstein thing. Anybody who I think is fishy. And I think this guy is fishy for quite a few reasons. And I'll tell you about that in a second. What's really getting the news, though, is that people are worried that this sets a major precedent. And I think we're being directed to focus on that. I think there's two reasons why it's not a precedent or a free speech thing or any of that. First of all, it's a plea bargain. So there is no legal precedent contained in this whatsoever. It would be considered a symbolic precedent. And the other reason is that it's not actually, I don't believe his charges ever really were what you think they were. So I've read many articles, even actually WikiLeaks emails that were leaked by the Cryptome guy, which is a whole nother thing I'll tell you about in a second. Talk about the Pentagon Papers and their right to publish, and Daniel Ellsberg, who was the guy behind that. He was a whistleblower, Watergate, I guess, or something. I forget what it was for. I remember thinking that he was not, I didn't buy his story either. Anyway, but he's like, he was defending Julian Assange over the years. He was defending him for releasing this. This is what put his whistleblower, Bradley Manning, at the time, in jail, was releasing footage of U.S. Helicopters, I guess, killing some people, including some reporters. And it was awful, and it was called collateral murder. And Daniel Ellsberg said this guy should not be in jail for releasing that. You should know what your government is doing. But the actual lawyer representing the prosecution said that Assange was not actually being charged with that. He was being charged for disclosing a small number of documents with unredacted names of sources or informants. So they didn't go for that anyway. So they were careful about what the precedent was going to be, because they probably would have had more of a fight on their hands. I mean, this is me actually acting like any of this is not staged, but I believe most of it is staged. And the idea that him negotiating with them or pleading out is like shocking or unlike him. I mean, his backstory is kind of fishy in this regard. First of all, back in the day, I mean, I did a lot of research on the fly this morning, so I'm trying to remember what fits in where, but I believe it was back in the Manning era that he did negotiate to the tune of agreeing to withhold 15,000 documents at the request of the US government. So he has negotiated in that way. And that's actually what the Cryptome guy does not like about him, is that Cryptome, he said it's basically free. He has servers. This guy, John Young, who was doing Cryptome.com like 10 years before WikiLeaks. He was in on WikiLeaks in the first like couple of weeks and then got out saying, these guys have an agenda, maybe to bring down governments. I don't know, but they're trying to raise millions of dollars. This Cryptome costs $100 a month. People just go up there and publish what they want to publish. It's not curated. I don't hold any of it. I don't hold any of it back. I don't have a staff. And I don't really understand what these guys are doing. So this idea that they may possibly be, that they actually have the power to withhold some of this stuff from the US government is actually a problem in the whistleblower world, because what you don't want is to release your information, and then maybe the government even knows you were the whistleblower because they know what Assange has, and then Assange doesn't give it out. And from what I understand, he says that you cannot then go release it again. Like maybe he pays you for it, but then you don't have any rights to it. And that's a very good way to not only suppress some of this stuff, but also to act as a honeypot where people will come to you rather than Cryptome. Cryptome isn't going to pay for it. So there seems to be a lot of fishy things around surrounding that. But that wasn't the only time that he negotiated with governments. And as a matter of fact, he has some weird backstory. You may have heard he was kind of involved in a cult where he grew up in Australia. And I saw a picture which is absolutely buried. Maybe I'll ask. Gabriel Custodiet is coming back on tomorrow to talk about Samurai Wallet. And he's the guy who can help you with the deep web searches. I want to see if he can unearth this picture that I used to have and probably have somewhere in my 13,000 pictures. Was a picture of Julian Assange as a drag performer. I believe he was Jane Mansfield, and he looked great. And if you really looked great. And I feel like he may have been doing that the whole time, like, not being in the Ecuadorian whatever, but actually living under a disguise, running around like that. But when he was much younger, first of all, in 1993, these are just little things. I always knew there's a lot of weird stuff. I think this stuff is in Wiki. In 1993, Assange provided technical advice and support to help the Victoria Police Child Exploitation Unit to prosecute individuals responsible for publishing and distributing child pornography. His lawyer said he was pleased to assist, emphasizing that he received no benefit for this and was not an informer. His role in helping the police was discussed during his 1996 sentencing on computer hacking charges, wherein he was facing up to 290 years in prison and got off with a slap on the wrist. And I mean, what did he what did he trade for that, I wonder? And I have to tell you, way back in the day, American Everyman, who I believe now is Nomadic Everyman, is opened my eyes to how Assange was, not what you see is what you get. And similar, he pointed out right away that Edward Snowden was not what you see is what you get, which was obvious to me the second he mentioned that. And then when they joined forces, then it was super funny, in my opinion. Like, it was like the Brangelina of honeypots. But there was another weird little detail about this. I don't know if y'all remember, was he Swedish? There was a kid, I have his name, Sigurdur Thordarson. He was some kind of FBI informant from a Nordic country who used to go to the Ecuadorian embassy, or he was like interning at WikiLeaks or something all the time until it was revealed that he was really like an FBI go-between. And I'm thinking, he wasn't spying on Assange. He was a runner. He was like the messenger. That was my guess anyway. Who really knows? But the bottom line is that what really changed from what Assange did, like you could say that for anything, like who knows what the world would be like if he didn't do what he did, but what did he really do? And what did it really accomplish? And anyway, but that's not why I think I'm not looking for the proof of the pudding in the eating. I'm just thinking this whole story is very fishy in my opinion. Let's see what else. Yeah. So I actually do wonder why Trump didn't do this, and that it's Biden's going to get credit for it. And I would much, much, much rather have them free Ross. And maybe this is what they're doing instead of that. Maybe it's just say, well, you can't do this all the time. You can only do it once every 20 years. But Ross has spent so much time in prison that, I mean, he would never be the same anyway. But that's really terrible. It's terrible. This was just breaking as we went to air here, that Kenya is popping off. It says, I think the last I saw was at least 6 people were shot and killed outside the Kenyan parliament. And I think this was a Reuters headline. Kenya's Ruto caught between street protests and the IMF. The IMF. It says mass protests against a slew of taxes erupted across the country. The vote on the final tax bill is to be on Tuesday, which I don't know if that means today or next week, bracing for more protests. So they owe money to the IMF, and the IMF wants them to raise taxes. But this country is extremely poor. And I was trying to see what their exports were, if they had commodities. I'm sure it's possible somebody listening can tell me, but it was not crystal clear from my cursory research what would have secured an IMF loan other than human capital, which is what it's coming down to. They want higher taxes. And these people have an annual per capita GDP of $6,500 roughly. There's 50 million people there or more, and like 300 and something billion in GDP. Well, it has to be billion. Anyway, that's just unconscionable to me. They're not eligible for loans. And if you want to give them aid, that's a different question. But giving them loans is a setup to me. And I think the IMF does that on purpose. They speak Swahili like Uhura. I was needing some comfort TV. So I watched the first episode of Star Trek, the original series, the other day. I bought it. I've seen it like 100 times and I bought it. And Uhura was speaking Swahili. It was very cool. Anyway, they speak Swahili in Kenya, and it's 85% Christian. I was surprised to see. So that's where Obama supposedly was born or supposedly not born or whatever, and his supposed father, original Obama, was supposedly an MI6 guy or associated with British intelligence. Webster Tarpley wrote a great unauthorized biography of Barack Obama. It had all that stuff in it. It was really, really great. He came up in conversation with Stella, who's not here, about the Black nobility. He did a lot of work originally in the Black nobility. I haven't heard from him in a while, but he was really an OG when it came to that stuff. So this thing about Kenya, though, it says there were youth-led protests that broke out in Kenya last week. So when it's youth-led, I'm like, well, it's not youth-led. Someone is leading the youth, but whom? And that's when I start to wonder, like, what is this about? Anyway, it's in response to the government's 2024 finance bill, which aims to raise an additional $2.7 billion in taxes to help reduce the country's budget deficit. Protesters have been calling on MPs to withdraw the proposed increase. It includes an annual 2.5% tax on car ownership and a 16% tax on bread, which was later removed from the legislation following public outcry. Bread. They're taxing bread. I mean, when they're taxing bread, it's because they don't have anything else to tax. That's when you see that the IMF does consider human capital as security. Or maybe they want land. I don't know. I don't know enough about Kenya at this time. If this continues, I probably will. So another thing, Saturday, there were attacks in Dagestan. So why does everybody know? Does Dagestan ring a bell for everybody, like the way it does for me because of the Boston Marathon bombing stuff? Very interesting. I will remind you of that in just a second. But let's hear It's on June 23rd, which was Saturday. Coordinated attacks were launched in the cities of Derbent and Makhachkala in the Russian Republic of Dagestan in the North Caucasus. 2 synagogues, 2 Eastern Orthodox churches, and a traffic police post were attacked simultaneously with rifles, automatic weapons, and Molotov cocktails. The head of Dagestan, wrap your mind around this. The Russian authorities designated the attack as an act of terrorism. Russian media reported that 6 of the perpetrators were identified by authorities, including 2 sons and a nephew of Magomed Omarov, the head of Dagestan's Sergo-Kalinsky district. Additionally, Amarov's cousin was also identified as a perpetrator. Amarov later submitted a resignation and was detained for questioning. Another attacker was a former president of the Sergo-Kala section of the Just Russia for Truth Party. I don't know what that is. It says, the head of Dagestan, Sergei Melikov, reported that 15 police officers and Rosgvardia officers and several other civilians were killed, including a priest whose throat was slit, if I recall correctly. I mean, and 6 of the perpetrators were also killed. I mean, whoa. So the fact that it was a massive inside job reminded me of some of the specifics of the Boston Marathon thing. So I have to go into the Wayback Machine to get it, but I did find some of my old articles on the subject. But Tamerlan Tsarnaev was at the Jamestown Foundation in, I think it's Lebanon or something. I forget where it is, but it's over there. And they train basically foreign operatives for the CIA over there. And Russia kept sending us, we're told, like, alerts that there was a terrorist in our midst. I think what they were really saying were, get this terrorist out of our countries. And I had to do this from memory because trust me, it's not easy to search this stuff 10 years later. But if I recall correctly, what the Russians were saying was that they had made Tamerlan Tsarnaev, that he was in Dagestan. And I remember very distinctly trying to, like, bribe venal imams I don't know if that was where I saw that. I learned that word for the first time, but the idea is he was over there radicalizing imams and mosques and stuff on behalf of the CIA. And why can I say that? But I mean, I believe that. Why do I believe that? Because his uncle, Ruslan Sarnayev, was the son-in-law of Graham Fuller, who was the CIA chief of, I think he was Afghanistan. But his daughter's name was Samantha Fuller Sarnayev. And this is a quote from Graham Fuller from I have this book, Dollars for Terror, The United States and Islam by Richard Labaviere, a French guy, but it's from before 9/11. So it's not tainted with like conspiracy theory stuff. It is straight up information. And he has a quote in that book. It's a Fuller quote, which says, "The policy of guiding the evolution of Islam and of helping them against our adversaries worked marvelously well in Afghanistan against the Red Army." He was there. He said, "The same doctrines can still be used to destabilize what remains of Russian power and especially to counter the Chinese influence in Central Asia." I think he was in, I think Fuller was in Dagestan or Chechnya, or he had other quotes about that. I wrote a whole article about it at the time, and I'm going to put it in the show notes. I'm going to dig that up. But that whole operation, I think Ruslan Sarni had a USAID, which is a CIA front, basically, operation running out of Fuller's basement. It's like had the address of Graham Fuller on it. So that stuff hopefully nobody cares about anymore, because I think it's kind of hot, like scary to talk about. Hopefully enough time has passed. But I just couldn't let that slip. I mean, Dagestan, these inside job in Dagestan, but they're killing. I mean, to slit a priest's throat completely and to kill like cops and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying one person's life is more valuable than another. I absolutely don't believe that. But that's a terrorist attack of the highest order. And man, that guy got caught right away. They keep getting caught. And the Moscow one was a much bigger one, also recent, like terrorist attack. And it was a terrorist attack. ISIS, which is us, took credit in both times, and Putin knows who did it both times. So I would suggest that you're not going to get away with it if you think you're going to pull one over on that guy. I just wouldn't. Another little thing, that article that was around that subject was that the EU is slapping sanctions on Russia's passing through LNG through Europe, so they can take their liquefied natural gas and they can sell it to Europe. I guess we're not getting enough over there. So the whole thing about stopping the pipelines into Europe from Russia, which would have just been a cheap, easy way for them to get gas, was fantastic. They were underway. The pipelines were practically finished. Some of them probably were finished. And we don't want that. We want to sell Europe liquefied natural gas, which is so dangerous. And those pipelines have probably all been interrupted. And I didn't know it, but I guess Russia also liquefies natural gas, and Europe isn't getting enough gas from us, it looks like to me. So they're getting some from Russia, but they're also stopping at some ports and maybe trying to bypass some sanctions by using, I don't know what, they're somehow passing through LNG, and Europe is saying you can sell it to us, but you can't sell it to anybody else. And we're putting sanctions on it there. But let's see. So yeah, here's a couple of quick hits. Today is the first day of Special Olympics bowling. So I have to take my son at 3:00. I don't want to be late because it's actually a hard team to get on, if you can believe that, which I think is hilarious. And I have yet to see if they actually use the bumpers, which even if you've got special needs, I feel like it's not really the Olympics if you're using bumpers, but we shall see. I'm thinking of taking bowling lessons. I think I will really have jumped the shark as an autonomous human being if I take bowling lessons so my son can play on the Special Olympics team. Okay. So let me just give you some quick hits, and then we'll get to some comments and I will play a clip for you. All right. The debate of Biden and Trump is on Thursday. CNN, Jake Tapper presiding, no audience. What do I predict? I predict that they will deliberately make stuff look fake, that there will be a story of deep fakery and it wasn't really there. It wasn't, I don't, and I'm sure there will be lots of fakery, but it's definitely going to be part of the narrative they are feeding the conspiranoids. Oh, here was another one that was bothering me or something that was on my mind and this article reminded me of. So the European Union is charging Apple with not allowing developers to freely direct customers to alternative ways to make purchases, which I personally feel, if I didn't think that Apple was basically government adjacent or whatever, if I thought that Apple had created in absolutely open competition and all these tech companies were absolutely not were purely private companies, I would say it is outrageous to suggest that you have to allow your customers to direct people to competitors. That's outrageous. You should be able to throw people off. You should be able to do whatever you want. But these things are monopolies and oligopolies, artificially created and probably maintained through regulatory barriers to entry. Perhaps these kind of barriers to entry, they start by hitting Apple, but it would hit other people worse in many cases, these kind of things. But the fine could be up to 10% of Apple's revenue, worldwide revenue, which would be huge. I don't know how they would even have the audacity to collect it. But Apple said they were going to retaliate by not rolling out some of their AI products. And this is reminding me that we do not need AI. When I started digging into two things. One, how much energy it's going to take. I mean, that's just unconscionable. It's I think it has the potential to be, if it's not absolutely positively, a crime against humanity to just absorb all of that energy to do stuff that we don't need and that we can do anyway. And it will probably be a way to get us further and further uh, into the grid to where it's a necessity, because like a human being, I am a natural man. You ever see that video? The guy like just walks out of court. I'm a natural man. I'm allowed to fish in a river. I'm a natural man. Like I can breathe, I can eat, I can do everything. I do not need to be plugged into anything. But eventually, as they absorb stuff like air and water and food, and they create these artificial worlds through the AI, then we will be sucked into it and we will possibly kind of be addicted to it if we can't get off the grid fast enough. But in any case, they're creating this virtual prison that it boggles the mind how much energy it's going to use, and we absolutely don't need it. And the second thing is that those guys on Rogan were saying how you're going to go to jail if you actually share or access it above the level that we have now, which is nothing. What we have now is not, it seems to me to just be a curation function, a search and curation function of a high capacity. But it's not intelligent. It's not even self-awareness is the Terminator threshold. Well, actually, self-awareness turned bad is the Terminator threshold. But even if it gets way, way more advanced than this and isn't self-aware or bad, those guys, those Canadian, what is that when someone's really soft, like the velvet glove thing, and there's something like kind of rapey about it. Like they're just uh telling us like, oh yeah, it should be capped where it is now. And the US military, I mean, I think they kind of said, well, the US military probably wishes that they had a monopoly on it, but it really should be totally controlled by the US government. But I heard US military is going to have complete control of this thing at that level. So just like other things like Google and the CIA and the NSA, we are paying for our cage and they will control it. So I would not feel threatened by Apple not giving me the AI. I don't know if you guys saw this lithium battery factory in South Korea killed, I think, more than 20 people, maybe 23 people. It just friggin' it blew up. And I'm wondering, They used to say you shouldn't plug in your phone, like, in your room or when you're sleeping or charge it like that. I have not heard of anything like that in this country, except for that horrible, horrible, horrible liveaboard fire off the coast of California, where all those people died in that boat. In the case of this factory, I believe, and in that boat, they're charging whoever was in charge with, like, negligence or whatever, but those things are incredibly dangerous. They're really dangerous, and of course, you know that's what I think took down flight MH370 over the South China Sea an hour after takeoff, and that's probably where it is right now. Uh, okay, so let's do some comments, and I'm gonna try to be a little quick because I have this, obligation. I'm, like, literally afraid that if I'm late, they won't let him be on the team. Yes, this is so true. Here's a comment from the Wild Urban Gardener. Assange was used as the cautionary tale of what will happen if you dig too deep. Yes, I had forgot to mention that. It was absolutely, in my opinion, a chilling effect. It's the chilling effect that is the most important thing of the Assange story. Yes, I agree with Eric that Assange is controlled opposition. He is an agent. Yes, I absolutely believe that. And Fun Times Indeed says, "Are you saying you don't think he was ever in jail?" I I think he has been totally an operative the entire time. So, do I think that there was ever a time when he just had his head in his hands, shaking his head, saying, "I can't believe I'm in jail"? No. Was he actually physically in jail sometimes, like Jeffrey Epstein? Probably. I don't know. Hamza Mir says, I find the timing of Russia being attacked on two fronts in Dagestan and Crimea. Oh, right, the Crimea one. And within 24 hours of that, Assange suddenly being released quite peculiar. Continuing saying, just found out Assange discounted Israel's Zionist involvement in 9/11. All very odd. Thoughts, yeah, well, if you don't know what happened on 9/11 and you have access to all that insider information, uh, you know, it has to be a reason he's not saying it. But there's something about, yeah, the Crimea thing. This is why Russia stopping Ukraine is Russia stopping World War III. Ukraine claims that Crimea is part of their country, which there is absolutely no legitimate argument for that at all, except for what Obama made up about territorial integrity. Territorial integrity. So I guess that would apply to Palestine too. I don't know. You're not allowed to expand borders or take them back or any of that. The people on the property have a legitimate right to self-governance, especially, and this is Vattel's Law of Nations, if there is a legitimate gripe. In Crimea and the Donbass, Russia is their first language. The official languages were Ukrainian and Russian. They could conduct their politics and everything else in the language they understood. First thing that our coup-installed government there did was ban the Russian language, disenfranchised every single person who lived there. That is a political non-starter. It's a completely legitimate reason to separate from them. They held a referendum and it was practically unanimous. Almost everyone showed up in Crimea to the referendum, and almost everyone, I mean, like we're talking 90%, voted for Russia. And this was a validated election. I mean, I don't know who was there, whatever. The little green men were just whatever. It's a base. It's like San Diego. That is what Crimea is. If San Diego, if the United States was taken over by Russia, I think San Diego would say, we're not going. Or Coronado Island or whatever. Like, we're not going. And we're going to resist this. So Russia's not leaving Crimea. And if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, then NATO is obliged to go to war with Russia for de facto invading a NATO country, because our position is, the United States position is, Crimea is still a part of Ukraine. It's very scary. Eric wants to know if everyone can see that the stage is being set for Trump to be the, quote, hero, a savior, if you will. Yeah, maybe. I never can figure the only thing I'm absolutely positive about every single presidential election since 2000 is there's a legitimacy issue. So whoever wins, the other side is going to say the election wasn't legitimate or that person isn't legitimate. So if Trump gets in, they're going to say he's a felon or he's an insurrectionist and it's constitutionally not okay for him to be there. If he doesn't get in, they're going to say, well, he was, yeah, like an issue about the debate is that he's under a gag order by the judge. So is he not allowed to put forward his real platform? Like, and then if he loses, will the argument be he would have won if it hadn't been for this persecutorial prosecution? So I don't know, but yeah, he could, if he would free Ross, he would be a hero, a legit hero, even if he was bad in any other way. So, all right, let's see. I had one more little article. I don't know if this is of interest to people, but it really bothers me the way science is presented these days, like as in not science. Okay. So this was an article in Men's Health, I think. The gap in life expectancy between genders is getting bigger. So what is killing men? Um At every age between birth and 75, this is from England, British boys and men have a greater chance of dying than women. And life expectancies are dropping faster too. Why are we more at risk? And how can we all avoid an early checkout? Well, I will just tell you personally, there may be something. I mean, I believe there's something about larger bodies. Um, Even like in dogs and stuff, they don't live as long. Body shape. So women have those, they store their fat in their butts and their hips, and that takes it away from the heart area, whereas men are heavier on top, which is definitely correlated. Um, I would say, I don't know how the hormones work, but stress, I really feel for anybody in a traditional family situation, like, or, if your woman has a uterus and she's using it, she is probably not going to make as much money as you out in the world. Like, and when she's incapacitated at home, feeding the babies with her body, like these are biological truths, then you've got a lot of pressure. That's why people would call me the soldier's wife was like was having her sixth baby and they forced him to get the vax. I mean, he could not walk away. He could not walk away. That was his life. I mean, it was terrible. I just feel like the stress of a breadwinner is enough to kill you. And men, like working age men, are the suicide demographic. It's like 70% of suicides are white men, adult men. So I mean, to the extent there's psych issues. But of course, this is why I bring this article. They just put a bunch of judgmental bias crap in there, terrible science, going in with a bunch of assumptions, trying to prove them, and then not even proving them, just saying stuff. Like, it really annoyed me. It says, attempting to find out the reason. The answer is, last July, the UK government's Health and Social Care Committee launched an inquiry on men's physical and mental well-being. MPs, members of parliament, were tasked with establishing why we had higher levels of disease than women, why men were more reluctant to seek medical help, and what issues lay behind the gender gap in life expectancy. See, why men were more reluctant to seek medical help. First, I want to see that reluctance to seek medical help is a risk to your health, because I will tell you, my father died at 79 through a surgery he did not need and could not survive, which was known in advance that he was not going to survive this, but he trusted his doctor who gave him bad advice. My mother would not be caught dead going to a hospital. She would not go. And I remember when my father died, and wouldn't even send my mom. They started sending her bills, and she was like, "Don't send me bills. You killed him. I'm not suing you." And they did not send her bills anymore. And my mother lived to 95. Obviously they but my father's sister lived to 95. But I'm just saying, that's an assumption right there. And I think it's erroneous. Okay. What the committee has revealed so far, so they came back with the results a year later, its evidence and sessions are ongoing, but their results are predictably complicated. The drivers of premature deaths among men include biological factors, low male health literacy. By the way, that flies in the face of the Hispanic paradox, which some suspect is that people who do not speak English who live in this country, the reason that they have a much longer life expectancy is because they can't understand all the propaganda, although the propaganda is definitely hitting the Latin community now. The chronic underfunding of medical services. So I guess men's medical services are underfunded, but women's aren't. Is that really what they're saying? And they're saying that's a legacy of years of austerity policies. The austerity, are they honestly suggesting that the austerity policies applied only to men or more to men than women? Anthony Davis of the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy called for more state initiatives specifically targeted at men to counter the stigma around seeking help due to traditional masculine norms. I don't know. Is it a masculine norm not to seek help? You're having a heart attack, you're like, "Oh, I got it. I got it." I don't know, maybe. That was not true in my household, but I would like to see the data that supports this because it seems like a bunch of crap. All right, here's something. All right, here's what, our clip of the day. Hat tip to Miss C, my friend in Georgia, who sends me every report of plane mishaps. They There are so many, um, and some of them I wonder if they're just getting reported more. Like, I was in an emergency landing once, a huge plane, it was her maiden voyage. Oh my gosh, did I cause it? I think I might have caused it. Now that I think about it, um, pretty sure I did. I was sitting, wow, that's crazy. I would never normally do something like this, but I was sitting, it was maiden voyage, and I didn't like that, I guess. Maybe I was a little scareder than normal. I was in the front row, so it must have been first class or Southwest or something. And uh the panel in front of me, like the bulkhead where I was putting my feet up, was super, super hot, extremely hot. So I mentioned it to the stewardess. I was like, wow, that's really hot. And she like went into the cockpit, and then I hear, we're making an emergency landing in Arizona or whatever. And I was like, I cannot believe I did that. And it was so stupid because we landed in Arizona at the exact same time we were supposed to land in LAX, like the exact same time. So obviously they didn't get on the ground any faster. But so there was an emergency landing. I doubt you read about it in the newspaper, but it was scary because there were all these fire trucks and everything. And the lady next to me was like, really? Really? Did you really have to? And I was like, but look, and she's like, it's going to be fine. And of course it was. Anyway, I didn't mean for them to land. I don't want them to land. I just mentioned it. Anyway, so there was an emergency landing that she sent to me, and just all these little reports. I think a lot of them aren't just being over-reported because people are sensitive to it. I think they're being pushed. And one of the big things that really turned my thinking on this was when the Boeing whistleblower died, which they ruled he committed suicide in his car, but it was being pushed as, like, possibly a murder. And they it was very clear, and they got attention to what he was actually saying, which was, I would never fly in a Boeing plane. And I, of course, was like, oh, they want us to not fly in Boeing planes. So that's happening. And in trying to understand how far, how big a psyop this is, I think it goes back, and I think it's there for a reason. Like, there is definitely an end game here with this Boeing. I'm not saying that, I don't know. I mean, I assume that the actual crashes were real. I don't know, but um watching the testimony of the CEO of Boeing in the Senate recently, today or yesterday, whenever, uh last week it was actually. it all seemed very fishy to me. Like this guy seemed to be the CEO seemed to be kind of acting a little bit. And he opens his testimony by turning around to people who were families of the victims of the plane crashes, holding up pictures of the victims, and he's making this like, "I'm sorry," and mea culpa, which honestly, I don't care who you are, like, that could have brought tears to your eyes if you really thought. So I was totally confused by that. But I just basically thought the guy sounded like he was acting. And I thought, this is an you know, these guys are usually like work their way up through the ranks. Like they have worked in every department. They know everything about building planes. They also are like politicians, but they really, really know their stuff. And I was like, this guy looks like seems more like politician, a PR guy than an engineer. And I looked into his background and it kind of seems weird and it makes me think that this PsyOp started a few years ago. So Calhoun, that's his name. He was at GE. He left to join privately held Global Information Services VNU, which was rebranded as Nielsen Holdings. He was CEO of there in 2006. Now Nielsen is the ratings company. It's like a media company kind of, or it's a media analysis company. He in 2014 he became executive chairman of Nielsen and also joined the Blackstone Group as a senior managing director and head of private equity portfolio operations. So that doesn't seem spot on for planes. He also became a member of Blackstone's management committee. At Boeing, Calhoun was a director. So he wasn't working there. He was a director starting in 2009 and was named lead independent director, which means he didn't work there, in 2018. The company separated the roles of chairman and CEO in the fall of 2019. And the board named Calhoun non executive chairman. So he really wasn't that guy. And I think he became CEO maybe in 2020. I don't have that here. In March of 2024, Boeing announced that Calhoun would be stepping down at the end of this year. So he's out this year. So I'm just going to play this to see if you. Oh, and here was another thing. In March 2020, which I think is shortly after he became CEO or around that time, he said something that seems extremely impolitic to me. It says he had an interview with the New York Times. He discussed the 737 Max's MCAS software. I've talked about that before, which actually the FAA interfered with their safety testing on that, if you'll recall, saying that Boeing had made a, quote, fatal mistake in expecting that pilots could immediately correct the software problems. That's what he expected, that the pilots would, that just sounds like something he would never. That's not how they operated. He went on to explain that pilots in Ethiopia and Indonesia don't have anywhere near the experience that they have here in the US. He unsuccessfully requested to go off the record after being asked whether American pilots would have been able to control the situation. Then he replied, "Forget it. You can guess the answer." I mean, that the CEO of Boeing doesn't have press training? Like, I think the contrary. I think he has quite press training, and I think it's a little bit of fake. So what could the Boeing thing all be about? I think they definitely want people to be afraid of going into planes. Airbus is going to be late on some of their deliveries, so there's probably going to be actual less air travel, like straight up. The fact that they're giving attention to people like Jim Lee, who I do think is telling the truth, but he's getting a lot of worldwide coverage because he's pointing out that a lot of what you're seeing in the sky is coming right out of the fuel, right out of the engines. So that could be an impetus to diminish flights. And I think Bill Gates is even advocating that. And think about like COVID, people being afraid of flying, vax passports, all these things are going to diminish our travel, especially our international travel. Anyway, so the whole point of all this is to see if you think that this guy is acting, if you think this is legit or what. Let's check it out. Let's check it out. All right.
Are you able to make sense of this?
No, sir.
Complete gobbledygook.
Yes, sir.
This is what Boeing has provided to this committee in response to our request for information. Can you justify these productions?
I will. I would describe it precisely as you did, and I can't justify. And I will most definitely follow up.
Okay. He is testifying. I think that's the Senate. I have known people who've had to go speak in front of the Senate. They subject you to days of coaching and training. Some of the old senators and congressmen run companies to help you prepare. Teams of people help you prepare. This is not believable.
How many?
So they let the victims' families in with all those pictures. So obviously it is, I mean, it's meant to have that. And this guy actually looks like he might have Parkinson's or something. He's shaking.
Of your employees have been fired for retaliating against whistleblowers?
Senator, I don't have that number on the tip of my tongue, but I know it. I know it happens.
I mean, doesn't that look like he's acting? And by the way, they give you the questions ahead of time, don't they?
Just help me understand that. I mean, do you get paid for transparency? Is that one of the metrics for your income?
I think the board counts on me for transparency.
Really? Because you're under investigation for falsifying 787 inspection records. The Boeing
Is Kevin Nealon a senator? I didn't know that.
is under criminal investigation for the Alaska Airlines flight. You were investigated by DOJ for criminal conspiracy to defraud the FAA. This is all in your tenure. This doesn't sound like a lot of transparency to me.
Being investigated is not the same as being convicted.
What about safety? Is that a component of your salary?
It sure is, Senator.
You know, have you seen the reports that the subcontractor that you used to make that door piece that fell out of the sky, that when the FAA went and toured the facility, they found one door seal being lubricated with Dawn liquid dish soap and cleaned with a wet cheesecloth, and another was being checked with a hotel room key card. Does that sound like safety to you?
Senator, I think our relationship with that particular supplier has been well documented, reviewed by the FAA, and most certainly us. And I'm very intent on acquiring that company so that none of that ever happens.
What about quality? Is quality part of your compensation package?
Senator, I meet with the.
My guess is his compensation package is closely tied to stock price, but I guess performance, maybe half and half.
The FAA pretty regularly. They don't hold anything back, and I'm not aware of anything that has been cited with respect to those accidents that we haven't taken action on.
Really? Because we've had whistleblowers. You said you'd listen to whistleblower testimony. We've had multiple whistleblowers come before this committee and allege that Boeing is cutting every possible corner on quality and safety, not just in the past, but now. They've alleged that you've eliminated safety inspections, that there are fewer in quality and there are fewer inspectors doing quality inspections out there. They've alleged that when they raised quality issues and concerns, they were reassigned, they were retaliated against, they were physically threatened. That doesn't sound like attention to quality to me. And yet you're getting paid $33 million a year. It's extraordinary.
Senator, we have increased our quality inspectors significantly.
I mean, that's just not very satisfying. It looks like the stock price has gone down, is like half of what it was a few years ago. Maybe somebody wants to buy it. Maybe, and cares about the price. I don't know.
Danielle Moore. Zipporah Curia is here today. She's the daughter of Joseph Curia.
So They're going
I would like to
through
apologize.
they're going through the names of all the people. Let's see his apology.
On behalf of all of our Boeing associates spread throughout the world, past and present, for your losses. They're dropping down the ring. I apologize for the grief that we have caused. And I want you to know we are totally committed in your memory to work focused on safety for as long as we're going to go back. Again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not a very convincing, but let me just this what I think is it was the biggest point of this whole thing was to just drive home that you shouldn't, that you should be worried. Let's see if we can.
From you, because what I hear from you is a lot of this team does that and that team does that, and I listen to the whistleblowers, but I don't meet with them. And I've heard about all this stuff that you Congress have meddlesomely asked for because the public wants to see it. Gosh darn them, but you actually haven't supervised any of it. I've heard that. It's a lot of it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. But meanwhile,
I mean, I believe that because he's a Blackstone guy and he was an independent chair. He was an independent board member. He wasn't a company guy.
well, you're getting paid a heck of a lot of money. It's unbelievable. If anybody's coming out of this deal good, it's you. Why haven't you resigned?
Senator, I'm sticking this through. I'm proud of having taken the job. I'm proud of our
Proud of this
safety
record?
record, and I am
You're proud of
very
this safety
proud
record.
of our Boeing people.
You're proud of
Very.
this safety record.
I am proud of every action we have taken.
Every action you've taken.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Wow. There's some news for you. Well, behind you can't see it. Behind you, the folks are showing pictures of the people who are the victims of your safety record. I think we can all see them. And I think the American public, when they fear to get on their airplanes, they understand your safety record. And frankly, sir, I think it's a travesty that you're still in your job.
So there you go. They want you to be afraid, be very afraid. And the guy, it's already announced he's stepping down at the end of the year. So anyway, I think the guy's acting. Curious to know what you think. All right, I'm off to Special Olympics. Thank you very much. This is Monica Perez.